Good morning, church. How y'all doing? For the record, just so you know, that is my least favorite moment every Sunday. Because I see the entire community just like chatting in the back and enjoying each other's company, and then I have to get up here and ruin it. Well, hey, folks, got just a quick announcement here. Coming up in 2 weeks, we have our annual meeting. It's gonna woohoo! Actually, no, we're gonna make this fun. We're gonna kind of gather together. We're gonna hopefully do some worship.
Yes.
We're gonna do some prayer. We're gonna talk about kind of where we've been and where we think we're going, and celebrate what God is doing here at the church at Union Park. So that's gonna be in 2 weeks, May 19th, after worship. Every dollar you give towards the mission of this church is felt personally. Thank you. Your gifts allow us not just to keep the lights on, but to actually advance ideas and dream about the future. And they begin to open doors for how we can see God move in some exciting ways. So thank you for your continued support. If you choose to give today, awesome. By all means, you're invited to do so. We have the basket. You can drop it off at the office throughout the week. You can give online or on our app or on our website if you so choose. I want to start off by talking about a friend of mine from a couple years ago. I'm older than that, a long time ago now. And he had just gotten off of 4 tours in the Army. He spent 2 of those in Iraq and 2 of those in Afghanistan. This dude had a story. He loves his country immensely, loves and respects the armed forces beyond doubt. However, his 4 tours as an EOD, and for those of you who don't know that, that's explosive ordnance disposal. So his job was a bomb tech to clear the improvised explosives on the side of the roads, in and out of Fallujah during some of the worst fighting. But his 4 tours as an EOD left him injured, scarred, and a bit demoralized by a lot of what he witnessed. Again, I want to say he loves his country. This is not a jab at the U.S. military by any means. This is just my friend's story. Because of that, he spent his years wanting nothing more than to come home, wanting nothing more than to be done with the fighting and to come home. He had been blown up several times by this point in his attempt to clear mines with the EOD unit. One of his jobs was he drove the little cart out in front of the minesweeper to try and test some of the explosive things, and as a result, he had been blown up several times in this cart, wearing full gear, and had some permanent back injuries as a result, and a lot of pain from that. He had seen civilians die in crossfire situations. He had to face the reality of fighting an insurgent enemy who blended in with civilian life, and had many stories of close-up and personal combat that would make my blood run cold. He wanted nothing more than to leave that world and come home during his tours, yet he kept signing up for more tours. However, when he finally did come home, he found that life was a lot more difficult than he had anticipated. In the Army, things were simple. You were told when to wake up, when to eat, when to go to bed, where to go. You were told where to carry your rifle, how to keep your rifle, how to load your rifle, and where to point your rifle. He would say that the mission was hard, but the daily decisions were easy. You simply followed your commands. But when he came home, suddenly he was responsible for his choices. And the burden of owning those decisions was extremely difficult. People were now depending on him for things beyond pointing a rifle or defusing a bomb, which, silly as it may sound, was easy. And success and failure weren't as clear as they were in the field. When you messed up, the bomb went boom. And when you succeeded, it didn't. What's more is that every failure was his own now, and couldn't be blamed on bad orders or an incomplete strategy. It was his. In the effort of reintegrating into what he called normal life, he turned to alcohol. He was unfaithful to his wife. And he made many other bad decisions trying to find a way to cope with the responsibilities of life. When his marriage had dissolved and he had disconnected with much of his community, he told me that at that point he wanted nothing more than to go back to Iraq and was determined to re-enlist because it was easier there than it was here. When I was sharing my feelings with him as his friend that I thought he was running away from his problems, his reaction was to cut me off with the rest of his friends, and I really haven't spoken to him since, other than some brief interactions on Facebook. For my friend, he wanted nothing more than to escape the horrors of war and be able to make his own decisions. But when that day came, the weight of those decisions proved too hard to carry. And before long, he wanted to go back to that which he was so eager to escape. Before long, he wanted to go back to that which he was so eager to escape. I love living in a church that's alive. We're good. See, the mission of Jesus is clear. The mission of Jesus is focused on freedom. And we can read that right there in chapter 5 in that very first verse. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. This verse is where we get the name for our entire sermon series, Free. Because the mission of Jesus, the gospel of Jesus, the good news of Jesus is that we now have freedom from the consequences of our sin. And that sounds like this thing, it's like, yes, awesome, sweet, let's celebrate, let's be joyful, something we've always wanted. And if it was without danger, the second half of the verse wouldn't exist. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again with a yoke of slavery. Obviously, when Paul was writing this to the Galatians, he understood that the draw to fall back into something easier, to fall back into slavery, was going to be present. And it was strong. Just like my friend who wanted nothing more than to escape Iraq, getting home, realizing, this is too hard, I want to go back. Christ's mission was freedom. It was to take away the definitions that we place on ourselves based on our actions, based on our failures, based on our scars. So then, how could we possibly fall backward? Falling backward is something we call legalism. And that's what I want to talk about today, is this idea of legalism. This idea of being overly concerned with the actions of myself and others, and essentially letting go of the freedom that we've been given. So what is legalism? Legalism is being defined by our actions instead of by the purpose that we've been given by our Creator. Legalism is a danger to the gospel of Jesus. Now I want to pause for a second because I'm sure most of you at this point, at some point, are thinking, it's like, oh great, another Pastor Josh sermon about judgment. This is a topic I talk a lot about. I talk a lot about judgment. I talk a lot about legalism. I talk a lot about unity. I talk a lot about crossing lines because this is a central idea to the gospel of Jesus. But when I talk about legalism, it's really easy to think about it as a them issue. We all have that straw man figure we like to think of in our head, of the one who draws the line, of the one who is overly judgmental, of the one who casts doubt and judgment on everybody they meet. We have this idea as it's a them issue, and we're so glad we're not them. But I want to challenge you this morning to not fall into that trap. We think that those judgmental people just need to stop judging. However, the pull of these easy definitions of good and evil, if we're honest, is an allure to all of us. The draw to judge, the draw to have easy categories, the pull to draw the lines and make things easier to determine rather than walk in the complicated reality of loving others, that is a draw for all of us. It's not a them issue. It's an us issue. It's a me issue. We all draw these distinctions, we all draw these lines, and it's important this morning to acknowledge that. So as we dive into this topic today, I want to challenge you to resist thinking about them. Do not think about them when we're talking about legalism. Do not think about them when we talk about drawing lines. Instead, focus on our own personal experiences and our own battles with judgment, and our own inability to cast grace when we need to. Where are the uncomfortable lines that you draw? Because it's only when we understand our own shortcomings that we can lay them before God. Amen? Amen. So we're going to continue today. We're going to be in Galatians 5, the first 12 verses of Galatians 5. We've already read verse 1, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Continuing in verse 2. Mark my words. I, Paul, tell you that if you let yourselves be circumcised, remember this is the conversation that he's dealing with of these people telling the Christians that they have to be Jewish first. So if you let yourself be Jewish first, Christ will be of no value to you at all. Again, I declare to every man who lets himself be circumcised that he is obligated to obey the whole law. Verse 4, you are trying to be justified by the law. You who are trying to be justified by the law have been alienated from Christ. You have fallen away from grace. Harsh words from Paul. Galatians has a lot of that. You see, when it comes to the law, one of the realities is it's all or it's nothing. There are no half measures if you are defining yourself by the law given to us in Scripture. Either you are saved by grace as a gift from God, completely out of your control, and because of the love and relationship and submission of our King Jesus, or it's by completing the necessary actions, pressing the right buttons on the vending machine, and following the rules as they're laid out. Pick one. Which is it? If you claim that there is a line by which someone is righteous and others are not, then you are actually denying the power of grace. And in that case, you'd better be perfect, because anything less than perfection is not good enough. This is why the world thinks we are hypocrites, to be real rough and blunt. This is why the world outside our walls sees the Jesus community as judgmental and hypocrites, because they see the judgment. They see the lines we draw. And they also see that we're not perfect. Because when we lead with the idea of good behavior, when we lead with the idea of correcting our actions, and we are not perfect, we fall short of the very message that we share. Because the reality is, like you've heard me say 1,000 times, I don't care how tall your stepladder is, you ain't getting to the moon on a stepladder. That's not how this works. Justification, salvation, being identified as a child of God, comes from grace. Grace, a gift from God himself, and nowhere else. Verse 5. For through the Spirit we eagerly await by faith the righteousness for which we hope. For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any value. The only thing that counts is faith, expressing itself through love. Within Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any value. It's not about what you do. It's not about the actions you complete. It's not about the buttons you pressed or how good your behavior is. Whether you are on target or off target doesn't matter. That's both an uncomfortable truth and also a glorious celebration. You know, I hear it said all the time, like when it comes to us, we want grace when it comes to our own sin. And so we want to celebrate the fact that, oh man, nothing I do can take me away from God's love. But yet, we draw those same lines for other people. And we do it on a regular basis, usually small. We like to think it's our job to make people behave. That's not our job. Our job is to introduce them to Jesus, to love them. The implications of this are huge, and probably one of the most casually overlooked parts of the gospel in the modern American church. It's not about where you stand. It's not. It's about where you're going. It's not the journey, it's the destination. It's not about where you stand in this moment. It's about where you're going. It's momentum over status. If the Spirit is alive in your life, you are going to be running towards Him. So is the Spirit alive in your life? Or are you still trying to build and climb your own ladder? Because, guys, I feel it too. I want to be seen as good. I want to be seen and respected as someone who's got it all together. I want to be seen as strong. I want to be the smartest in the room. People who know me are like, uh-huh. I'm just as guilty of this as anybody, of building my own stepladder of achievement to prove to the world, to those watching me, how good I am. But what Jesus is saying, what Paul is saying, circumcision nor uncircumcision doesn't matter. The height of your ladder doesn't matter. How good you are, the results of your actions don't matter. They're meaningless in the grace of Jesus, because you are saved not by what you do. You are saved as a gift by grace. But it's always easier to make generalizations and draw lines because then we don't have to engage people on an individual level. On some level, we understand that we're saved by grace, but we still expect there to be a line when someone's actions are too bad to be included as a brother and sister in faith. Yeah, no, God invites everybody, but if you're doing that, obviously you didn't get the invitation. We understand that we're forgiven. We grapple with that idea. But we still try to draw lines to separate one another. We make generalizations based on our own comfort levels with certain sins over others. How do you feel about divorce? How do you feel about homosexuality? How do you feel about addiction? How do you feel about pride? How do you feel about lying? All of these are equally listed in various ways throughout Scripture with varying degrees of severity, yet all of them are forgivable and forgiven by Jesus on the cross. Do we use them to draw lines? We make generalizations based on our own comfort levels with certain sins over others. Then we don't have to be bothered to learn to recognize the Spirit at work. Because if we follow the generalizations we make, if we follow the indicators that we lay down, then we don't actually have to do the hard work of recognizing the Spirit moving in individual lives, do we? And we have an excuse not to engage then with people because they make us uncomfortable. Look, when I started ministry, I used to say, like, all right, God, I'm ready, but the only thing that I am uncomfortable with, just don't send me into end-of-life care. I am not equipped to deal with that, God. Don't send me into end-of-life care. I can't deal with that. I remember in Bible college having to go through funeral homes in kind of preparation and learning how to handle funerals as a pastor, and just being destroyed emotionally by having to walk with people through this pain on a regular basis. You remember that day. I was traumatized coming home. But let me tell you something. In ministry now, I've been in ministry now just over 10 years, and I have done 56 funerals as a pastor. I've learned to value that time of walking with families and loving them in their time of need, and I see the value in that. So I said, hey, God, at first I'm like, God, I'm good for like youth ministry or young adult ministry because then they're way far away from that and I don't have to deal with that. And the God's like, hey, funny. COVID. At one point in my life, I'm like, hey, God, I'm good with loving anybody, just don't send me to the projects. And then I managed a GameStop in the middle of 2 housing projects in North Chicago, got robbed 9 times at gunpoint, and started dealing with drug dealers, kicking them off my front step on a regular basis. And I got real comfortable with kind of the seedy world in the projects. I said, God, I'm good with taking care of people, but man, I can't deal with racism. Like, that's not something that I feel like equipped or comfortable to deal with. And then God put me in a location, in a situation where I had to confront racism on very uncomfortable terms. I have found over and over again in my own walk that when I start to draw lines and say, hey, God, I get that you forgive everybody, and I know that you forgive everybody, but I am having a hard time with that. Please put me where I'm strong. God's going, funny you should ask. Funny story, I finally stopped telling God my expectations, and that's when God finally sent me here. And like all of a sudden, woo, I'm home. it's easy to get lured into drawing those lines. But let's be honest, it's not theological lines, they're comfort lines. We'll claim they're theological lines because then that gives us justification for our judgment. But in reality, they're comfort lines. Remember, it's about momentum, not status. Where you're going, not where you are. When we learn to recognize the Spirit at work, that means actually engaging with people on an authentic level. That means learning their story. It's interesting. I have found that people who befriend one another from different perspectives, opinions, and walks of life suddenly have their judgmental lines start to crumble. Because once we humanize the other side, once we learn their stories, their motivations, their dreams, their failures, their loves, their losses, suddenly the other side becomes relatable, becomes human, becomes my brother, my sister. And even people that we never thought in a million years that we could walk beside and love, that we never thought we could even have a conversation with because we disagree on everything, suddenly we are ride or die brothers. Love is complicated, and the call to love is incredibly complicated. But the reality of Jesus is that someone's sin, no matter what it is no longer a disqualifier for grace. So wherever we draw that line, whatever line that is for you, whatever your comfort is, it's wrong. Wherever your comfort ends, you're wrong. God loves them, and so should you. And not just in word, but in deed and in our heart. You know, I argued with a friend of mine all the time as a teenager. He came to Christianity about the same time we did, and we had an ongoing argument. He ended up leaving the church because of his view of hypocrisy in the church. And one of the things I would always talk about is how love is a verb, love is an action, love is something you do. And I've always seen that perspective. I mean, love is a verb, love is something you do. And I've seen that as a challenge. He saw it as a weakness because he wanted people, he saw this and read, we need to love beyond action and actually love here. We need to come to terms with the hate that we secretly feel, with the disdain and discomfort we secretly feel with people, and he was demoralized by the fact that people didn't see that. At the time, we argued about this. I've come to agree with him. Yes, love is a verb. Love is action. Love is visible. It's something you do. It's something you act on. But it's also a challenge that goes beyond action and is an internal reality in your heart. You can't just walk the walk. You also have to talk the talk. You can't just love people because you're supposed to. You need to come to terms with your own discomfort and give it to Jesus and love truly even the most broken and uncomfortable people in our lives. Nothing we do, no action we take or refrain from taking is beyond submission to Jesus. Nothing we do is beyond his forgiveness, and nothing we do has any role in us being saved. Beyond our decision to follow him, to accept the forgiveness he's offering, there's nothing we can do. I'm going to continue. Verse 7. You were running a good race. Who cut in on you to keep you from obeying the truth? That kind of persuasion does not come from the one who calls you. A little yeast works through the whole batch of dough. I am confident in the Lord that you will know that you will take no other view. The one who is throwing you into confusion, whoever that may be, will have to pay the penalty. So Paul is saying, like, what suddenly got you sidetracked? Why are you suddenly turning? You had the truth, you had the way, you understood this forgiveness of Jesus, and now suddenly you're sidetracked into this world of legalism. And he was very clear, undermining the mission of Jesus, undermining the grace of Jesus. This is serious stuff. This is not something that can be overlooked. This is something that has a huge damaging and needs to be accounted for, needs to be given up, needs to be given over to Jesus. Agents of confusion will have to pay the penalty, is what he says. But then there's that verse in the middle. And I've heard this quoted so many times in weird contexts. That verse in the middle, a little yeast works through the whole batch of dough. I don't know about you, but I've heard this usually described as an excuse for in the positive. It's like every little bit of good goes a long way. A little bit of yeast leavens the whole batch. Change just needs one good person because a little bit of yeast goes through the whole batch. But that's not what is meant by this verse. Just like how a little bit of yeast will fundamentally, chemically change an entire batch of dough and leaven an entire batch of dough, just a little bit of this selfish lack of grace will permeate throughout its entire community. In this metaphor, yeast is an infection. It's a toxin that once introduced will corrupt everything. And just in case you think I'm being a bit dramatic here, you see those quotation marks? This statement is not original to Paul. Paul is actually quoting a commonly repeated teaching of Jesus at this point. We can see a version of that in Mark chapter 8, verse 15, when Jesus says, "Be careful," Jesus warned them, "watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod." Making that same kind of comparison, the voices and leadership of Herod and the Pharisee would be enough to fundamentally change the entire culture, and they needed to be careful to stray away from the legalism that was coming from their mouths. Otherwise, they could infect the entire culture of God's people. This is where Paul's comment about yeast comes from. He is repeating a commonly shared teaching of Jesus about being aware of corrupting influences that seem small and insignificant, but are actually incredibly, fundamentally changing. Paul takes this sentiment and an entirely new, kind of reworks it into another letter he writes to the Corinthians in a way that make a little more sense to our modern sensibilities, where he writes, "Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character." Again, it's this idea that just a little bit isn't safe. Just a little bit of sin isn't a safe amount of sin. Just a little bit of denying grace is not a little bit. Because just like yeast, a little bit will fundamentally change the entire dough. What is grace? We need to understand this. Grace. Romans 11, verse 6. And if by grace, he's talking about forgiveness, if you're forgiven by grace, then it cannot be based on works, because if it were, grace would no longer be grace. In order for grace to be grace, in order for grace to be a gift, it by definition cannot be earned. Nothing you do could ever earn it. Otherwise, it would not be grace. Otherwise, it would be a commercial exchange. It would be something you buy with your actions, something you trade for. And that's not the case. All right, Josh. We hear you. You've been talking for 5 weeks about legalism, about judgment, about how everyone is free and how sin doesn't matter. Whoa, no, that's not what I said. Sin does matter. The follow-up question I always get when I talk about this is, what about discernment? What about recognizing what is good and what is bad? I get it that everybody's forgiven, but what about our ability to recognize sin and evil when we see it? Yes, that is so important. But discernment does not take priority over our command to love one another. You need to learn how to discern what is right and what is good. You need to learn how to discern where the Spirit is present and where the Spirit is moving and where the Spirit is not. These are vital and important skills you need to learn as missionaries, as followers of Jesus. And we'll talk about that more next week. That's going to be kind of the main topic as we talk about the fruits of the Spirit. But before we get there, you need to understand discernment does not take precedence over love. When asked what the greatest commandment is, Jesus says, love God, love people. That's what he says. He doesn't say, love God, love people, except for the ones that do bad things. Love God, love people, and make sure to recognize evil. No, that's important. You need to recognize evil when you see it, otherwise you will be led astray. However, the most important thing is loving God and loving others. Discernment does not trump grace. Discernment does not trump love. But authenticity is hard. Authenticity is hard. When we talk about not judging, what we're talking about is embracing freedom. But guess what? Freedom is difficult. Freedom means that we're responsible for our actions. Freedom means engaging darkness. Freedom means engaging the broken things in this world, not being held back from that. Freedom means actually influencing the world around us. And that authenticity, that ability to recognize love when we see it, is difficult. We are no longer defined by our actions because Jesus has taken the consequences of sin upon himself. However, these old definitions sure do make life easier. And just like a prisoner who wants to return to the simplicity of prison, or a soldier who wants to return to the simplicity of orders, the allure to sink back into those easy definitions is easy and permeates into our everyday life quite a bit in ways that we don't even recognize right away. Because loving others authentically is hard. But that is the goal. That's the goal. If you're worried about being holy, if you're worried about having the tallest ladder, don't chase the ladder, chase love. Because in learning to love more and more people, in learning to embrace more and more people, in learning to be an encouraging voice for the world around you, you will find righteousness. More on that next week, though. And again, verse 1. If you're going to memorize anything from this series, memorize this. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by the yoke of slavery. We are free from being defined by our actions. Those distinctions no longer have meaning. They no longer have weight. And if we place those distinctions on others, we are giving weight and authority back to the very thing that Jesus came to unravel. Do not allow yourself to slip back into slavery. Let's pray. Dear Jesus, I confess that I fall back on the easy distinctions and the easy lines. I want grace for myself, but often focus on discernment when it comes to others. Lord, call me to account. Show me the places in my life where I'm failing to embrace grace. Show me the places in my life where I'm slipping back into slavery and adhering to the very things that you work to break us free from. When I see people, let me see them as you see them. All their faults remain, but we see who they're meant to be, not who they are. We resist the idea of drawing lines and instead embrace the reality that you did pay it all. All. Not just the sins that I'm comfortable with, but you paid for all of it. That is an uncomfortable truth to those of us that call you Father. Because the lines are comfortable. God, we want to be like you. We want to be Jesus followers. We want to be Christians and lift up the power of your name, the power that is true in forgiveness, in grace. Love people where they stand so they can understand the purpose that they've been given as children of you. God, bless this church and let us be a voice of that kind of love. In Jesus' name, amen. So as you go forward today, I want you to go out into that world with eyes of grace. Don't see the world through the old lines. Don't see people like we used to see them when actions define them. Don't slip into slavery. Instead, seek to see the world through the eyes of Jesus, through the eyes of grace. Love the uncomfortable ones. Amen? All right. See you next week, guys.